Hello and welcome back, and that's right, today I want to talk about this. This is from Asustor. This is the Lockerstor 2 Gen 2. It is the refresh of their 2020 released Lockerstor series, and I've got to say, of the entire range that they have and the solutions they have in their portfolio, the Gen 2 series in 2, 4 and 6 bay, we'll be reviewing all of them in different videos, have been requested by you guys for quite a while. And although Asustor is not the brand I talk about the most on the channel of any of the storage or networking brands I have here in the studio, I've always had something of a soft spot in my heart for them, simply because while you've got all these other brands that are trying to fight, and dare I say it, fanning the fanboy flames from time to time, Asustor sit there in the background with their arms crossed just going, yep, you do you, we'll just keep doing. That's what we'll do, we'll just keep doing our thing. And that's what they do. And with each iteration of their solutions, what you end up finding, and particularly in the case of the Gen 2 that I'll go into later on, is you find their solutions are just focusing on the things that everyone else is kind of already done, and then they try to do all the fandangly crazy stuff that no one wants to do. And Asustor just continue down the path. They continue releasing their solutions, upgrading what's there, adding features on that work within those remit, and what you get is arguably a very central solution, with all the other brands kind of pulling you one way or another. And again, that will make more sense later on as we go through some of that hardware architecture. But this Gen 2 you can pick up again at the moment for about $450. It is a little expensive for a 2-bay, has to be said, but it also has certain features on it that are just not available on any other 2-bay in the market right now, which again, once we really dig down into it, I would argue this could even be classed as a 6-bay NAS down the line, or potentially even more. But again, the retail packaging hasn't changed a great deal since the original Lockerstor 2 that we reviewed back in 2020 on the channel. It's all largely the same there. It's just been scaled up for the Gen 2 version. Before we go any further, what does Gen 2 even mean? Because I'm sure a number of you think, oh, they've just stuck a V2 or a G2 on the end. It must be nothing. There's nothing really extra in it. Actually, when you really drill down to the specifications, when you look at the previous and the Gen 2, the difference is about $60. So remember that, $60. For that, you get a new and improved CPU, you get the potential for more memory, you get a better storage applications as well that we'll talk about later on. I mean hardware storage applications there, and an improvement in almost every port on there, with the exception of network ports. And even then, in the 4 and the 6 bay, something to talk about. But for now, let's get this out of the box, see what we get for that 450 nicker on this 2-bay NAS. Got a bit of protective foam there. We have our box of accessories. Let's see what we get. External mains lead. We get our PSU, a 65 watt PSU on the 2-bay version. We also get 2 Ethernet cables included as well. We can have a little look and we can see that these are Cat 5e cables there, but again, it's not a 10 GBE box. We're not going to go too hard on that. On top of that, we've got a quick start installation guide and details on the 3 years of warranty that the system arrives with. And we've got screws for 3.5 and 2.5 inch media, and a lockdown cable and screw for the PSU as well. So those are our accessories the system arrives with. And again, that PSU quite moderately sized for this device. Again, that is a 65 watt PSU for a 2-bay, which is quite standard. And then you got the unit itself, another big old bit of foam there, so plenty of protection for this device in transit. Let's get this unwrapped. Right up there. Let's get the device for us. Maybe fast forward. Man alive, that bag really put up a fight, didn't it? And there we have the 2-bay itself. Again, you can see there from it, they're utilising the same chassis as the previous generation there. There's no LCD panel on this 2-bay. There is an LCD on the 4 and the 6-bay models, we'll talk about in future reviews. It's quite compact. The first thing I will note about it is it's metal all the way around the external chassis there, and indeed the spring-loaded trays are also metal inside. So on the one hand, that's going to be very good for passive cooling, and quite good in terms of kind of rugged value for money. But again, that is going to mean when this is in operation with drives larger than about 8 or 10 TB, it's going to, hum a little bit louder than some out there. The audibility of the drives that you put inside, particularly enterprise drives, are going to be that bit noisier on this system. And again, I will set it up for the software portion of the review later on. along with the 4 and the 6 bay as well, but still nonetheless, there's definitely going to be a slightly noisier NAS to run in operation compared with plastic chassis, but again, that comes down to your preference. So before we go any further, let's talk a little bit about the internal hardware, because there is some really interesting stuff to talk about, and we're definitely going to need our little friend, the screwdriver, later on. The CPU inside is an Intel Celeron-based processor. It is the Intel Celeron N5105, a 2.0 GHz quad-core processor that can be burst up to 2.9 GHz when needed. That is a decent little jump. Also, it has integrated graphics, which can be burst up to 850 MHz on board inside. I think it starts at 350 to 400 MHz on board integrated graphics there. So already that CPU is going to support a number of things. Everything from transcoding and encoding HEVC media to supporting virtual machines, a lot more graphical-led processes. And it's got a decent little clock speed to boot inside. Now in terms of memory, the system arrives with 4 gig of DDR4 memory. It's non-ECC, but it's 2,933 MHz memory that can be upgraded to 16 gig internally inside the system. So that's all available pretty much off the bat with that 4 gig right there at the beginning, lovely and solid. Now inside there is also 4, count them, 4 M.2 NVMe slots inside this device. We'll remove the lid in just a moment, but those 4 storage bays inside are Gen 3 times 1 or times 2, I believe, depending on the 2, 4 or 6 bay unit you go for, mean that you can add 4 bays of superfast PCIe Gen 3 storage inside on M.2 NVMe. They can be utilized for caching, or they can just be used for the raw storage pools. They can be used to run the OS, ADM, or individual applications. So again, really nice upgrade when you think the predecessor only had the 2 slots, and they were a lower gen as well. Gen 2 and only 2 slots. This is Gen 3, twice as fast, and 4 slots. So this is effectively a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 bay NAS. That is intriguing. Now, the design of it, as mentioned, is very metal, which again is going to be good or bad depending on you, the user. On the front, we've got a USB port there, and on the back, we've got a USB port. They are USB 3.2 Gen 2, so 10 gigabits per second USB ports there, so 1,000 meg connection with much faster external storage devices, which is great. There's also a range of different USB devices you can use that include their own expansion devices. You can add another 8 bays of storage to this with their own expansion chassis, which is great to hear in terms of expandability, particularly with a 2 bay that's already got 4 bays of M.2 NVMe storage there built into the top, which is really, really good news. Now, the trays, as mentioned, are metal all the way through, and they aren't click and load. You will need to screw drives in manually, but that's not the end of the world, is it? Let's be honest, we can put the effort in. And if we have a look at those down, they are spring loaded and they are lockable, as well, as you can see on the front there. If you have a look inside, there's no loose cables, no loose wiring, there isn't separate data power. I think we can largely say goodbye to that for the last few years. I haven't seen a NAS with separated power and data for quite a few years, but even then, this is still a nice, clean setup in there. There's absolutely no concerns there throughout. There's ventilation on the top, which is intriguing, but of course that is where our M.2 NVMe's are. But there's also ventilation there on the side, but no base level ventilation and no ventilation on that side. Now, the metal will act as heat dissipation, which is great, but still nonetheless, I would have liked to have seen a little bit more ventilation. There is obviously a reliance on this device on horizontal cooling, with the rear fan acting as active airflow for those passive vents, and even the trays have got an element of ventilation there on the front, but there's maybe a little less ventilation than I would have liked to have seen. But again, I'm sure that's been something that's been tested extensively over at HQ for these guys. So there's LEDs on the front that can have their brightness adjusted, of course, on the fly, and you can run this device with just a single drive if you want, or 2 drives inside in like a RAID 0 or a RAID 1 environment. You can even spread the RAID over those expansions that we talked about. And of course, the 4 M.2 NVMe's can be in a RAID 0, they can be in a RAID 1 in pairs, RAID 10, RAID 5 indeed. So again, you've got lots of RAID opportunities and functionality in terms of data storage on this device, particularly the Gen 2, than you might think just glancing at the device. Now in the rear, we can see there is our other USB port as mentioned there. And again, that supports not only the expansion device, not only superfast storage, you can also use 2.5 to 2.5 GBE to USB adapters, of which Asustor provide one. There's even a 5 GBE to USB adapter out there you can use as well. Now, in terms of network connectivity, we've got 2.5 GBE. The previous generation of Lockerstor had that as well, but these two ports here again, 2.5 GBE networking there between those two means a combined 5 GBE with link aggregation or port trunking, which means you can get somewhere between 250 to 500 conventional megabytes per second connectivity with them both. And if you break it down to the proper fill bandwidth, that's going to be like 270, 279 per port, which is really interesting to see. But I will highlight that the 4 and the 6 bay, they had a PCIe upgrade slots. You can add 10 GBE to those. Now, on the face of it, one might argue, why doesn't this have 10 GBE as an upgrade option on PCIe there? Now, there's a few reasons I can kind of guess, hypothesize. Number one, space on the system. Two, the bandwidth of those PCIes. If you've got those 4 slots there, chances are they've arranged these as PCIe Gen 3x2, where there may be PCIe Gen 3x1 on the other devices. We'd have to check that. The other thing is, it's a 2 bay. Even if you use the most high fidelity SSDs that could max out current conventional SATA speeds, even in a RAID, it wouldn't just combine that performance. In other words, you'd never be able to fully saturate a 10 GBE connection on this device. Now, on the rear, we also have an HDMI output. Now, there's a few things here. Number one, Asustor have an HDMI out application. I made a video about it quite a while ago. It's called Asustor Portal, and the ADM Portal is a parallel running HDMI output. It has its own user interface, its own controls, its own applications and app center, and all of these run at the same time as the NAS and the ADM GUI that can be accessed via a desktop or utilizing mobile applications. With that, there is a whole host of first and third party applications for enjoying multimedia, for enjoying existing services, porting in streaming services, lots of different apps that you can utilize in there, and all of them being accessed by that HDMI. The other thing is that this system utilizes HDMI 2.0B, which is increased support of things like SDR, HDR, and HLG in terms of output there, with doing a much better job of sharing and combining bandwidths for the output of 4K media, which is getting particularly dense in HDR, particularly HDR 10-bit and stuff like that. So, again, nice upgrades in almost everything about this device, in terms of the M2 NVMe's, in terms of the USB connections, in terms of the HDMI, and in terms of that CPU inside and faster memory. There's a lot to be said with what's going on inside this device. Now, again, just before we move on to the software portion, I think it's worth us looking at those M2 NVMe slots there, because there is something I do want to touch on there, and a lot of that is to do with spacing out and heat, because in a box this compact, 4 M2 NVMe SSDs, they're going to get warm, and particularly if you're utilizing them for caching, so the operations and the hitting of those drives is going to be much higher. So if we remove our metal casing, we can take a closer look on the inside. And what I'm pleased to say is those M2 NVMe's are not double stacked. They're not either side of the board like they were in the predecessor, which was a connector that was going onto the main controller board, and there was a drive on either side. This separates all 4 of them into a lovely arrangement line there, lowering heat generation and kind of double stacked SSD heat that can really kind of affect the performance inside. It's also toolless in design, so there's no need for a screwdriver. Just pull up those clips, put in your SSD, clip it down. And again, you don't need to fully populate this device with those M2 NVMe's. You can run on just a single one or add them as you go. You can even use 2 of them for caching and another 2 for a raw storage pool if you choose. So what I'm going to do now is get this device all plugged in and set up so we can take a good look at ADM right now at the end of 2022 to see just what it can and cannot do and what this device brings to the party. Let's fast forward to the setup of this device and have a little look at ADM. Okay, so here we are on the graphical user interface of our Lockerstor NAS. Now, real quick, a quick disclaimer, because I'm reviewing the 2, the 4 and the 6 bay of the Lockerstor Gen 2 series, I will highlight they all arrive with the same version of Asustor's ADM platform, and I will be doing a much much fuller review of this software very, very soon. But because they're all going to use the same software, all three of those reviews are going to have this same insert here in the middle. So if you've already watched one of those reviews, you're going to know everything I'm going to show you. But if you're not aware of what ADM can bring for you on this NAS platform, let me walk you through it. This is the graphical user interface here that you see when accessing the device on a web browser. You can use pretty much any web browser, Mac, Windows systems, and there are a whole host of mobile applications as well, something I'll cover more in the full, most recent ADM review very, very soon. Now, you log in via standard security credentials. You can create new accounts, multiple accounts as well, and you can modify a lot of those details very quickly on the fly. There's also support of 2FA, two-step verification there, and again, you've got different applications that you can use to take advantage of that. I do recommend personally using the Google Authenticator app. Again, it's very reliable. It's one that I personally use, but you can do a lot of stuff there. You can change a lot of the access privileges, a lot of the storage quotas and stuff like that, and we'll go into that a little bit more in just a moment. You can change a lot of the background information there, change a lot of the themes. Why don't we just leave it there on that theme there? And you can download and modify some of those themes as well later down the line. Now, with the user interface of ADM, some of the options aren't quite as intuitive as I'd like them to be. Some of the placement of them, some of the stuff that I'd like to see. For example, the storage manager there. Within the storage manager, you can access and control a lot of those different variables, but they haven't rolled in things like snapshots, which are their own standalone area here within the single storage window. Now, I understand why they want to make sure they separate storage and separate snapshots and separate file management, but still nonetheless, I think they could still maybe tweak things a little bit there on the GUI when you're accessing it. It's still, you know, so much more intuitive than it was in the past, but there is still a little bit of rooms of improvement. But that said, I will say things like managing a lot of the storage inside. As you can see, I've put two M.2 NVMe's inside this system, so this is how quick it is. We can go ahead and, if we choose to, take advantage of we can go for an advanced setup there, and from there we can choose to go for perhaps a RAID 0 to combine those M.2 NVMe's, and we can go ahead and just immediately select them and turn them into our raw storage pool. We can even enable BTRFS, as you can see there, on the M.2 NVMe storage, and all of that is accessible straight away off the bat. And if you utilize the M.2 NVMe's at the start, you can go ahead and install ADM on these. Alternatively, if you wish, you can go ahead and create an area of cache. You can go ahead and create SSD caching to work in conjunction with your primary storage there. So read-write caching, for example, which will improve things in either direction. You can go ahead and again use one or you'll need both of those for combined cache, and you can use those same drives for caching. Indeed, because there are 4 slots, you can use 2 of those for caching and 2 for raw storage if you choose. Very, very beneficial indeed there. Now, if we come out of there, the storage manager, they still lack a fluid RAID system for me, which is a shame. It's one of the few areas where I'd like to see ADM really scale out a little bit more. But they have the traditional RAID configuration. Again, the 2 has only got the RAID 0, RAID 1. The 4-bay's got the RAID 5 and the RAID 6. And the 6-bay, you can roll in some of those combined or cluster RAIDs as well. Now, when it comes to adding services, you know, back and forth, the App Center is, you know, pretty detailed there. There's a whole host of first-party and arguably a lot more third-party applications as well. We've already installed a bunch of them there, but there's still plenty of apps to be getting along with there to sort of look through and set the device up. And when you do install an application, what's intriguing, this is one of the many things that you're going to see during this video, which shows changes that have been made in 2022 to kind of increase security and definitely default level security. If we go ahead and install a third-party application, or even a first-party application for that matter, let's go ahead and install one here. Let's go for the Git one here. If we install Git, you can see that it will let you know that there are things to bear in mind, like in notes and more. But some applications, when you install them, if you are going to be enabling remote level access, it will ask you whether you want to enable port forwarding on those applications by default, or you want to make sure that access is prohibited off the bat, which I think just this little tiny option here at the bottom, this little checkbox, is invaluable for a lot of more inexperienced users that want to make sure that when they're installing applications, they're not accidentally pushing holes through their secure network there. So that's quite intriguing. Now, I mentioned that about third-party applications. I think there is still too many. They've definitely gone through and got rid of a lot of them. It has to be said, they've added a lot of quite popular ones, things like AdGuard, a lot of the VPN stuff there. But, I mean, the Amazon Prime stuff here, having all of these, it's just irritating, I think, for a lot of users. I think the Amazon Prime stuff there, it makes sense if you're utilising your Asustor as an HDMI output going into a nice big screen TV. The fact that you can add Disney, to add Netflix, add Amazon, add your streaming services, add YouTube and that. So rather than using an Amazon Fire Stick as a separate device or like a Roku or something, you're still using your Asustor to do all of those things. It's just, for me, it's messy having a lot of these apps. A lot of them are linked to the Asustor portal tool I'll talk about in a moment, but even though they've gone through with a fine-tooth comb and got rid of a lot of these applications, they could still stand to get rid of a lot of them, and just moving some of them into beta is not quite good enough for me. But again, it's better than it was, certainly. Now, I mentioned the HDMI output. We will get on to a lot more of the GUI and tools here. I'm not going to go into too much detail on the Asustor HDMI output. The tool itself, known as Asustor Portal, can be configured quite a lot. This is that parallel running GUI via an HDMI output that can be controllable with a remote control, mobile phone, or KVM with a USB. And again, you can change a lot of those things. You can adapt it in a number of ways. And this is another area that we've seen a lot of improvement. I'm not going to dig deep into this, but I will say I have done a whole video in 2019 which goes through a lot of these core features, what you can install, the applications, going all the way through, and exactly what the device can do over HDMI, and that includes surveillance as well. But we'll get into that later on. That is that parallel Asustor Portal user interface there. If we come out of that there, we can take a little look at some of the first-party tools. Now, when it comes to the first-party tools, I will say, I do mention this again later on in a review, but there's a lack of AAA plus stuff for me. There isn't a lot of AI stuff. And I get it. AI is expensive to develop, but given that they're using a lot of third-party tools on there, I kind of would have liked to have seen a little bit more of that being rolled in. ADM is significantly more responsive now, significantly more secure, I would say. Also more fluid. The latency has been dropped dramatically. Remember, you are accessing this device remotely. This is not a local USB-connected device here. Yes, I'm using the local network, but I'm still using a device that's far away here. Now, again, they've got the file explorer there, so within the web browser, being able to browse a device, something that is an increasingly weirdly rare feature, particularly when you look at a lot of the mainstream NAS devices like WD, or even the Drobos when it went around. It just seems mad to me that they don't include a file explorer like this, and the fact that it has copy-paste, it has compression, it has extraction, it has sharing options natively built into it. You can even look at images and videos within this browser as well. I think audio files as well, but if you don't want to use that tool to do it, they have their own multimedia application, so there is SoundGood, and in the SoundGood application, you can browse a lot of the files and folders on your device. You just need to make sure they are indexed, but I would recommend going for the Hi-Res Player application, because the Hi-Res Player includes a lot more dedicated audio tools inside to browse through a lot of your media, and there is elements of metadata scraping as well built into that tool. Again, it doesn't look as slick as some of the apps out there, but it's not a bad tool. It even has some variables in its setup that you won't find elsewhere. Now, when it comes to video, on the plus side, there are elements of metadata scraping built in. So as you can see here, if you look at the matrix here as a file, we've got some of that metadata scraped there. We've got some of the thumbnails and background information there. A little bit of the cast listing there. It's not quite on the same league as Plex, something we will be doing a dedicated video on, and I have set this device up for Plex, as you can see there. But unlike Plex, which has a lot more slick stuff going on, a little bit, reviews, trailer information there, not all of that is here. Now, you can, if you choose to, select the files, click the three dots, edit it there, and then you can choose, if you wish, to search the internet for some of that information. So you would just put that there, and then you would search IMDb for information there that you can rip from. But it's not as elegant as automated metadata scraping. Some of it has been done, and the video app, it has the features and functionality you would like. It does output via HDMI. It can be accessed remotely, and there's also 2 network multimedia apps built in there in order for you to enjoy your media on the local area network. There's a mini DLNA tool, and there is another media server tool as well. I can't immediately see. I'm sure it's there on screen, and I'm just going blind. When it comes to photos, again, you can browse, and it does scrape the metadata of the images that it has rather than going remotely or using an AI. So as you can see there, you can go ahead. As you can see, this is some food I ate in Wandsworth. That is my diet. I'm not sure I'm going to live much longer. But if we make our way through, it has those tags and stuff. But again, all of this has been done scraping that metadata. It's not been done with an AI deep video analysis or recognition tool, something we're seeing increasingly more common in 2022 on NAS platforms, something I wish was there. But again, because of support of things like MB, Jellyfin, and Plex, you can use those third-party tools if you choose. Now, in terms of surveillance, this is another area that I think Asustor could stand to improve upon, because although there are things that I like, and I'll get onto one in a moment in terms of backups and synchronization, the surveillance platform for me is still a little lacking. It's heavily reliant on you utilizing the client tool. You can't really do a great deal via the web browser in Surveillance Center. If you try and open it, what it will do is ask you at first to download and install the desktop client tool, which is just opening on my system here. And then from the live feed there, you'll go into the settings and sort of browse through, and it feels a little lacking. It feels a little clunky. It doesn't feel as smooth as I'd like to see. Even the icons are a little dated there. And adding cameras, all the functionality's there. Adding cameras, patrol patterns, and alerts, email, that kind of stuff. And working with the mobile application. But you can't do all of this in the web browser. You can't enable AI-supported services there. And it's something that I think they could stand to maybe upgrade towards. I know they're a smaller company than a lot of the ones out there, but it's a real shame. Again, I won't go into huge amounts of detail, but I did do a full overview of surveillance on the Asustor platform in another video that should be linked in the description, and I covered a lot of ground there. Not only did I go via the graphical user interface there on that app, I also use the mobile tool as well, AI Secure, and then of course at the end I included HDMI with the KVM surveillance. So a lot of the good cool features are there, but it's the deployment and the user interface that still feels to me just a tiniest bit more rudimentary and a little bit dated there by design. I don't think I've actually changed my hair in all that time. Now, things that I like, the backup and synchronization tools. Not only is there support of snapshots and particularly improved resource managed snapshots in things like BTRFS on this platform, but on top of that, you have synchronization and backup tools in different ways. So you can go to the Data Sync Center here, which allows you to synchronize between a lot of those third-party supported clouds that you're familiar with. And again, this will allow you to synchronize, say, a Google Drive over here floating in the cloud with the NAS and your mobile devices, and use that as a portal there to run your backups and synchronize on those cloud platforms that you've got. But you can go bigger if you choose. So if you like, you can head over to where is it there, the Cloud Backup Center, and in this one it's a lot more of your blob object storage there, your bigger ones. And again, this is going to be a backup, so it's not really a live synchronization like hybrid sync or hybrid mount, but it's nice to have all of these rolled in by default on the system. Now, if you're looking as a home user that wants to synchronize with your local devices, you do also have the choice of using the Easy Sync Manager there, which allows you to set a remote access between the NAS, create a team folder that is shared between multiple users, so on their own PC or Mac client devices, they are synchronized with this team folder that lives on the NAS and allow you all to work together. And that creates a synchronized folder, let's have it up there, on your NAS. So we got it here on the right hand side for the Easy Sync Manager, and that allows you to create those team folders and team managed areas, or for a home user, just a folder that's natively visible on your host system in your own native OS. You can even, use the inbuilt application control center open that up there, to map network drives and do a lot of other features and services. Access via FTP, remote level access and stuff like that. All of it built in there. And again, I'll go into more detail on a lot of this stuff in the dedicated ADM 2022 video soon. Now, other things that I really liked, again, going slightly back to that security thing there, is how they've changed a lot of those defaults. I touched on this at the start of the software section. They have definitely ramped things up by default. A lot of services are by default turned off. They're either turned off or you can't enable them without the system warning you first. Like, what you are doing is, not without risk. And I like that they're now alerting you that a lot more, provocatively there early doors when you set the device up. Indeed, if I make my way into my review of this device and go into my footage there, when I was getting ready for the ADM images, when I was setting the device up for the first time, I came across this alert here that let me know when you're setting the device up for the first time that I was utilizing insecure ports for this default setup. Now, this is something I was doing because this is a quick setup shutdown, but I liked that it warned me during that initialization that I was using ports that were insecure. And it did say to me, you are doing this at your own risk. And I think a lot of NAS brands could stand to learn from an alert like this, because it will help users understand the inherent risks and what they're doing sometimes with these systems, and hopefully avoid any things happening again like Deadbolt in the early stages of 2022. Now, another thing alongside that is that Dr. Asustor there. This is where the system can be scanned and checked for any kind of vulnerabilities in your own native setup. It doesn't scan above and beyond the likes of repairing things with a VPN or scrambling things. What it does do is analyze your default setup and says, this is something you could stand to improve upon. This is insecure. This needs redundancy. You need to change these things. And you can change the severity of these diagnostic checks within this tool. And again, you can change a lot of these settings and it will highlight the areas of concerns, and you can map that to alerts or get support tools from Asustor there to help. Now, that's kind of the main back end there. This is the user interface. There's so much more that I have not covered during the setup of the device. Things like the USB storage, what you can do with those USB drives, how USB is connected if you want to use some of the backup tools to create that multi-tiered backup solution where you're going onto the cloud and backing up to the USB and backing up to another NAS. That can all be managed from within this. But it's a larger degree of support of those third-party tools more than anything that I think some users are going to have to get to grips with. So, for example, they don't have their own virtual machine app. What they have is VirtualBox support there. If you want to use Ubuntu for a VM, they have got Linux centers which will download and install and deploy an Ubuntu VM with lots of different versions there on the side. You just click install, it will download the image and deploy it, which is great, but it's still a third-party tool. There are some areas where first-party tools are still the, case in point, like the multimedia tools there, and indeed Asustor Live for live streaming efficiently, and apps like Take Easy, which allow you to rip content from different sources, as well as the download center there that will allow you to, manage your downloads, FTP, NZB, BT, standard HTTP downloads, all from within here, and a range of VPN supported, some of which you may have heard of, or customized third-party ones that you can configure on the fly, all built into that ADM. There are lots of features and services here. There are lots of things that you can get to grips with and enjoy this system, whether you're going to use the first-party apps or you're just buying this so you can enjoy watching The Matrix in mad 4K on Plex Media Server. But we can't ignore the fact that there are some features and services that are just a little bit underwhelming compared with some of the stuff that's out there. And although it is intuitive, very user-friendly now, and very, very responsive, I think Asustor could still stand to upgrade some of its core kind of SMB mid-range applications. But that's enough of ADM. Let's make our way back into the studio and summarize this review. So what do I think? Well, first and foremost, the things that I love about it. Number one, those M.2 NVMe slots. I think that brings this to being one of the most prosumer 2 bays currently available in the market right now. What it lacks in not having that 10 GPE upgrade in this 2 bay form at least makes up for with that tremendous amount of performance benefits of having 4 M.2 NVMe SSD slots alongside the 2 main SATA bays. As a Gen 2 device, I really like that they could have tried to bash out a whole new device, tried to charge a lot more money for it, but they didn't. They took the existing structure. You've got to factor in things like sustainability perhaps, but on top of that, just upgrading it and increasing the price over its predecessor, the Gen 1, by just $60 for all the extra this brings to the party with that new CPU, the PCIe's, upgraded the USB, upgraded HDMI output. I gotta applaud that. This for $60 more, the Gen 2 version does seem fantastic for the price point. And indeed, the 4 and the 6 base having 10 GPE on board is also chef's kiss, very much up my strata. On top of that, this device, and I've said this before in other videos about Asustor's Lockerstor series and the NIMBUStor as well. What you get with a device like this is you're getting things that their biggest rivals, Synology and QNAP, are offering, and you get to kind of be selective. If you want BTRFS that Synology keep talking about, they've got BTRFS. If you want 2.5 GBE and HDMI output and M.2s used for raw storage, this has that. So you don't have to go to QNAP for that, you don't have to go for Synology for that. And it served itself once again as a fantastic middle ground between the two of them. And that increased hardware capability that you're getting for that money is very, very good value for money in such a compact 2 bay device. It's not perfect. There are obviously things about it I wish were a little bit better. Number one, kind of wish there was I wish there was a fluid RAID system, the likes of Synology's SHR or TerraMaster's T-RAID. It is going to be a slightly noisier NAS to run because the whole thing's metal. But again, if you're not going to be in close proximity, that's not the end of the world. Some applications I think could do with a little bit of modernisation. The surveillance center application is a little bit clunky and it's a little bit dated looking. If you'd seen my videos where I showed you the HDMI out and utilising that surveillance center, it is a little, noticeably behind the likes of Synology Surveillance Station and QNAP QVR Pro. And ADM, in its general presentation, is leaps ahead of however it's been in the past. It's very user-friendly, very clear as well, and very responsive. They've updated the Linux kernel, you can tell. But at the same time, it still doesn't have some key features that some of its biggest rivals have, who are clearly spending more on their software. There's no avoiding it. But things like hybrid mount, a lot more of the AI-supported services, virtual JBOD, hybrid cloud synchronization, things like that, and bolting those services on is not present here. And what you are getting is definitely more hardware than software for your money overall. But I've got to say, as far as Asustor products go, the Gen 2 Lockerstor series of 2, 4 and 6 bay, and I will cover this in those reviews, is by far the best NAS that I've seen out of this brand. And if this is a taster of where the brand is going, particularly in its hardware, but hopefully that software remaining in the middle, doing what it does right, not trying to overstretch itself and just keep one foot in front of the other, I think we are going to keep hearing from Asustor, and I'm really looking forward to seeing what they're going to be promoting in 2023 for the more enterprise level lineup. We'll have to wait and see what that is. But thank you so much for watching. If you have enjoyed this, you can visit other content related around a lot of the stuff we talked about today, Asustor and others, linked in the description. There should be a full written review, if not live now, then very, very soon, linked in the description. If you want to learn more, click subscribe as we go into more depth with Asustor's Lockerstor Gen 2 series and ADM coming very, very soon, as well as comparisons against other 2, 4 and 6 bay NASs from other NAS brands coming soon to help you choose the right NAS for you. And if you need free advice to help you choose the right solution for your home or business needs, use the free advice section over on NASCompares and the free community forum Ask NASCompares. Finally, if you are going to buy this device from Amazon, and if you found this video helpful, there are links in the description that will take you to Amazon in your region. It won't cost you anything extra to use them, but we at NASCompares, me and Eddie, get a kickback from them, and it helps us carrying on doing what we do. But apart from that, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.